questions that you got.
Yes. So I sent Kylie over a list of questions yesterday that came from different emails, training logs, and the Slack. So we can just jump right in. Everyone knows Kylie. Everyone loves Kylie. I think since the last time we talked, an exciting new development has happened, and Kylie is now not just a sports nutritionist, but also a published author, and her book is exceptional. So if you haven't gotten it, I will link it in our newsletter this week, but you should definitely read it. It's very good.
Has it been that long since we met?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Wow.
you were just you had finished it, and the announcement of the publishing date had just come out.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think it was available yet. So,
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah. Wow. I'm
so
like, time flies. That was 6 months ago, I guess.
yeah, it's been a minute. So it's good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into all these. I mean, hopefully we can get through as many questions as possible here. That's a
Yeah,
lot of that was a
there's
lot of
a lot.
pre-sent questions. So I was like, whoa, okay. It's gonna be
Yeah.
like rapid fire, you know?
Yeah, we can just kind of take it like one question at a time, no rush to get through them all. But
Yeah. Do you want to read the questions and then I'll go into the answers and hopefully, and then also I just want to add like sometimes on these Q&As, it might not be as like personalized as you want it to be, or you're like I'm missing something from the answer. So you can always send me a follow-up email at kylie@flynutrition.org if you don't get what you need out of it.
yeah, I'm gonna write that down too and pop that into the newsletter this week. But let's dive in. All right. First question. Should endurance athletes take a multivitamin just to help fill in the gaps since we're exerting ourselves so much and we're likely bound to fall short somewhere in our exorbitantly high needs?
Yeah, so I get questions about supplements all the time, and I feel like with the elusive multivitamin, I think and for a lot of questions, I think the answer is going to be it depends, which people don't like to hear, but uh, I would say like if you're somebody that is curious about your micronutrients, number one, you can look at tracking a little bit in something like chronometer if that's appropriate for you, if you like aren't triggered by numbers and logging things, and you can do a quick snapshot, 5 to 7 days of what you're taking in on the regular, and then look at the nice thing about chronometer, it has a really good micronutrient breakdown, so you could look to see what you're actually getting in your diet. And then you do have to assume for some things that we're losing in sweat, the amounts that they're recommending are probably a little low. So when we're sweating, like we lose calcium and magnesium and potassium, and so some of those amounts of things might need to be a little bit higher on consumption from the diet that compared to like what the reference ranges are on chronometer. Um, you can also get blood work done. It isn't necessarily going to show everything that might be in a multivitamin. And then, I am okay with people taking a multivitamin, but being cautious, like especially if you're taking other things. Like if you're already taking iron and then you're taking a multivitamin on top of the iron, is that too much? Like, is there iron in the multivitamin? So is that too much? And we also have to think like depending on the potency of the multivitamin, are there things in there that might be like throwing you over the edge? Again, it's like it's kind of hard because like the ultra potent multivitamins might have like quite a bit of vitamin A or vitamin D, and you might not need some of those things. So I think the challenge is not overdoing it when you're doing something like a multivitamin. Worst case scenario, I would say you'll have expensive pee. And then with some of the main ones I like people to be careful with are vitamins A, D, E, and K because they're fat soluble vitamins. So I would just look at the multi and try not to maybe be doing one that has like a ton of those fat soluble vitamins in it where you might overdo it. And it will list on there like the percentage of daily value that, the multivitamin has in it of these certain things. So just doing your homework, I guess, is the point if you are going to take one. And then when you choose a supplement, I always like for people to think about like certified for sport or NSF certified supplements so that they do like a little bit added layer of testing on those things. It's still not 100% perfect, but it is a way to kind of make sure you're getting a reputable brand when you're trying to make a choice as to which one's best for you. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I think there's like you can go about it methodically if you are looking to. And then if you just want to take one and then maybe monitor your blood levels of things like vitamin D, you can also do that as well.
Yeah, that was a really good answer. I think like a lot of times that gets to be kind of overwhelming for athletes, that I think like the best thing we could do is like do your due diligence and like figuring out what you
Mhm.
need and what you are already taking because you don't want to overdo it.
Well, and then I see people that are like take Centrum or something, like just like a random multi from the grocery store. And I'm not saying that you're not going to get anything out of it, but they have done independent testing on some like cheaper brands, and oftentimes they don't have in them what they say they have in them. So then you're like, you could be getting random stuff in your body, or like you're just not getting what they say is on the label.
Well,
So
that's some like spring energy stuff. Like that's
yeah,
terrifying
right.
because the FDA doesn't regulate supplements, right? Like, or
Yeah, no, they don't. So that's why even like the certified for sport ones, it's not 100% guarantee that you're, gonna get what's on the label, but it is a better option because they are doing third-party testing and publishing the results and whatnot.
yeah. Ooh, okay. Lots to think about with that one. The next reason or next question is there a nutritional reason why you might still feel a bunk even when you're fueling and hydrating to your calculated needs?
Ooh, I would actually the first place my brain goes to is daily nutrition and like are you meeting your needs for different training days on the daily leading up to either a race or like a long run or long weekend of training? Because I think sometimes athletes get behind and then by the time they get to the weekend or something, they might not have full glycogen stores or just might have been underdoing it a little bit. And that can lead to issues with bonking, even if you have like the most perfect dialed like fueling plan. Um, I would say we have to be careful sometimes with like calculated needs too, because I would be curious like what this person has done as far as like calculating the needs to just ensure that those are appropriate. And we got to look at electrolyte intake, fluid intake, and carbon calorie intake. So we got to have all three components when we're trying to figure out like what could be the cause of the issue. And then even to that point, from a a fluid and electrolyte standpoint, if you go into the run and like you haven't been hydrating and electrolyting all week, that could be another, like a dehydrated state going into the actual training session or race, could lead to feelings of bonking. And then on the other end, it's hard to tease out because on the other end, if you overhydrate and you just are using water, that can flush out your electrolytes and that could make you feel like you're bonking or a little dizzy or don't have energy. So, I think, again, it's like putting on your detective hat when you're trying to figure out some of these situations and then like maybe methodically approaching it based on what you think the most likely thing could be and experimenting with that first. And then you like go through the process. If that doesn't solve it, then go to the next thing. So that's like three-ish ideas maybe to consider.
Yeah, that's a really good That's a really good answer. And I think it kind of like falls into the category of another question that was asked. And I've heard that if your hydration isn't dialed, the body can't properly absorb carbohydrates during endurance exercise. And like, is that true? And if so, how closely are fluid and carb absorption linked?
Um, so if you think like whenever I like to explain it when we're thinking about the fueling plan, the three components, the electrolytes, the fluids, and the carbohydrate piece, if something is off, then that can cause like concentration gradient differences. So like if you don't have enough fluid coming in, or like say you have a hyper concentrated solution coming in, that can affect like if you think back to biology class and like how different things are absorbed based on concentrations, that can affect the ability of the body to either absorb the nutrition or kind of get the nutrition into the body to be used for energy production. Or if there's a situation where things are hyper concentrated in the intestine, like in the inside of the intestines, then from the blood plasma, we start pooling water from the blood plasma, and that can cause a situation where you have like diarrhea, cramping, energy issues, and it can affect the actual absorption of the carbohydrate that you're taking in. So think of it as like that concentration barrier or something, like how we're trying to make sure that we're getting the right concentration of things in so that the absorption can go into the body and be used for energy production. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's kind of like I would say like the best way to kind of explain it.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, like how is there a limit to the amount of sodium that one can take in, or does that depend on fluid loss, sweat rate, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's where, yeah, one of my colleagues, Kelsey Pontius. She's of Meteor Nutrition. If you don't follow her on social, she had a good post yesterday about Scratch's new electrolyte booster, which is essentially just like powdered electrolyte that they're claiming you can just put into any kind of sports drink mix to get your sodium uh, or electrolyte content up in your drink mix. The challenge that I foresee with this is like people, I feel like now there's like almost too much emphasis on electrolyte and sodium, and the chances of overdoing it now are probably going to go up. And so if you're questioning it, I mean, you can get a sodium sweat test done and see like, am I a like super heavy salt loss person? Am I a medium, like normal salt loss person, or a low salt loss person? Like I've worked with people that think they're a high salt loss person, and then they're actually like super low, and they're having like nausea and vomiting in the middle of ultras because they're actually doing like way more than they need per hour. So if you are doing too much, that can cause some serious GI distress. Um, so you can do the sweat test, or what I like to tell people is the average person needs about 600 to 800 milligrams of sodium consumption per liter of fluid that you're consuming. Now, that doesn't mean that that is 600 to 800 milligrams per hour. That depends on how much fluid you're losing and replacing every hour. So this starts to get confusing for people sometimes, but there's like two different things that you want to pay attention to. Your actual fluids that you're losing per hour, and then your sodium losses per hour. And then when you figure out your replenishment rate, you have to figure out, okay, a percentage of fluids that I'm losing per hour, usually 75 to 85% is what you want to target to consume per hour, and then you match the sodium to that. So say you like, so 600, 800 milligrams per liter is the average that people are losing. So then replenishment, or sorry, the amount people need to replace. So if you're consuming half a liter per hour, then you're only going to consume about 300 to 400 milligrams of sodium per hour. confusing, I know, but but just trying to explain how there's like more than one component to the actual fluid electrolyte equation, and people tend to get mixed up with like sweat testing. They think that it's like the sodium or something, and like they don't consider how the fluids impact the sodium that you need to consume. So all
Yeah.
the things. And if you are confused, send me an email, like, or Kristen, I'm sure you can help people interpret their, like if they get a leveling test or something.
Mhm.
So just use caution with the point being use caution with sodium. Try not to overdo it.
Yeah. So, okay, that's such a good question because I think we have a lot of like very salty sweaters on the team. So just like
Okay.
word of caution there.
Yeah.
Um, I think another good question that ties into this about electrolytes is, are electrolyte tablets or drink mixes more effective for longer races? Or does it matter?
I would be curious about like what they mean by tablets. Is that the pills or like the absorbable, like precision tablets that you put in your liquid, you know?
Yeah, I would assume it's geez, I don't know. I would assume it would be like the salt tabs, but for longer races like 100 milers or 100K,
Hmm.
precision might, could we hit both?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like when we look at the capsules, I think the challenge with those is some of my athletes, it's like kind of a big hit of electrolytes at one time when you're taking a pill. Because
Mhm.
it's like for a lot of them, it's over 200 milligrams of sodium and some other electrolytes too. And that capsule itself, especially if you have like impacted stomach acid or something, can be hard to break down. So with some of my athletes, that those pills don't tend to work the best for them. But for other people, like with carbohydrate containing drink electrolyte mixes, they actually respond better to the pills and water versus having their carbs in their drink mix. So I wouldn't say, and then compared to like the precision without carbs in it, that might be one of the best options for people that are like, I don't want to take a pill and I'm worried about this big hit of electrolytes coming in at once. And then also the carbs in my drink mix seem to make my stomach feel like uneasy or something. For some people, that is the case, and like keeping their calories and carbs separate from like the actual solution, like drink solution, feels better. Um, what I think can happen is again, for some people, like the drink mix and then they have gels or like other things coming in and it's like too much carb coming in or like a too much of a concentrated amount of things coming into the body at one time and that overwhelms the GI system. So kind of like I was talking about before, that all those things in there, it's like a hyper concentrated or hypertonic solution. So that draws water from the blood plasma into the intestines and can cause the diarrhea and cramping and stomach issues that people experience. So, um, what I would say is if you do have a sensitive stomach, you could experiment with just like the water and something like a precision tab or something like that and take in sips, like small sips of electrolyte and then take in your gels and food and all that separately as an option.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's been a couple different scenarios on the squad, myself included, where you're taking like a high carb electrolyte drink with
Mhm.
precision at the same time, and over 20
Yeah.
miles, 50 miles, whatever, it's too much. And
Yeah. Well, and that actually you bring up a good point. That doesn't mean that you can't have a carb-rich solution to use because it can be valuable, especially for longer races that might be hot, like to have a liquid carb option because you might not be able to take in a lot of like other carb sources outside of that drink mix. So I think that you bring up a good point to mention to people like having dynamic options for your fueling plan is a good idea so that you're not just pigeonholing yourself into like this is the only thing I'm doing for the whole 100 miles, like likely that's going to go to crap because it's
Yeah.
100 miler and things don't always go as planned. So having some different options or ways to get your calories and electrolytes in is a good thing to think about.
Yeah, I think especially during hotter races or super exposed races where your stomach kind of shuts down and doesn't
Mhm.
want to take in any more gels or real food, and you have to switch to liquid
Yeah.
calories.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that. Okay. Really like this question. It's how do recovery supplements like turmeric, tart cherry juice, ginger, etc. really help? And do we need to be spending our money on them?
Okay. Um, I guess my first statement on that is they each have actual science behind them, like as far as like inflammation balancing properties.
Mhm.
Um, I think we have to be careful because from what I see in practice, careful with how we're using them because I'll see people that are just like taking a turmeric supplement every day. And they're like, oh, I don't even know why I'm taking this. I heard it was good for inflammation or something.
Oh my God.
Anytime you're taking herbal supplements, you just have to look at what's the science behind them? So there is actual inflammation balancing science behind turmeric and ginger and things. But then, like, is long-term use a something you should be doing? And that's where it gets tricky. Like with turmeric, there's some concerns that there could be liver damage caused by long-term turmeric supplementation. And if you don't know that or don't look into that, that could be a bad thing.
Mhm.
I think targeted use for certain situations is how I recommend using these things. So same thing with like tart cherry. I don't know about like downsides to that, but potentially like if you're using tart cherry like immediately after exercise and all the time, like does the high antioxidant content of the tart cherry have an impact on recovery or sorry, not recovery, adaptations to training potentially. So thinking about okay, targeted use of turmeric, ginger, tart cherry, when would be a good time to use them? So if you're, and this comes with nuance too, if you have an injury and it's like a chronic injury or you're recovering from surgery or something, maybe not like in the first week would you use these things, but like after the initial like inflammation kicks in and is like doing its job, then maybe you do a turmeric, tart cherry, ginger combo until you're through the injury cycle thing. And then from a racing and training perspective, if you have if you're in like a couple week period before a race, it's okay to like kind of take one of those things. You've kind of gotten through bulk of the training, you're getting ready to race. That could be helpful, kind of tampering down inflammation a little bit, or post race, recovering from all the damage that you've done to your body. Doing that for a couple weeks, not a bad thing. But maybe like relying, the other thing is tart cherry is a natural source of melatonin. I can't speak to like relying on that to sleep. I don't know if that's going to be a bad or good thing and like will it lose its effectiveness or not. So, understanding the nuances between all of these things I think is important and then deciding how you're going to use it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I mean, I do use personally, like I use tart cherry, but I only use it like at certain times.
Yeah, same, same. I think for me, figuring out the timing of when to take it and how much, instead of just like chugging a whole bottle of tart cherry juice before bed, like that was a
Yeah.
good idea. But that was the tricky part is just figuring out like how much and when.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say for all of those, like right after exercise is not when I would do it, like right in the hour after exercise, because of the possibility of like high antioxidants impacting training adaptation. So then outside of that window, usually like pre-bedtime, I would say for these is like a safe time to do it. And especially with the tart cherry, right? Like hour before bedtime if it's a natural melatonin source. Great.
Yeah, that sounds
I
ideal.
like making a little mocktail. It's always a
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. Like a
yeah,
mock
with like club
carbohydrate.
soda, tart cherry, and lime. That's a good one.
That sounds great. That's like, yeah, as like a pregnant person, like I'm so psyched about that. Where it's just like you get a little treat before bed and then
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
actually sleep. Yeah. So you mentioned the window post run, and that's when not to do the like high antioxidants, but there is still that 30 to 60-minute window where you can refuel with like carbs and protein, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we're just looking at and I wouldn't like over obsess over it, I guess. I'm just saying like high amounts of antioxidant right in that window afterwards. Maybe not the best, but like if you do it, it's not like you're gonna like the world is gonna end, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, protein and carb post exercise. The and carb is important because I'll have people that are just doing a protein shake and that likely is not fully maximizing the absorption of the amino acids into the muscle and helping to maximum amount with the recovery process because we know that carbs also we need for glycogen replenishment too.
Yeah. Yep, yep. So speaking of carbs, and I think just like food in general, right? So there's a question about what is the advantage to taking liquid or solid calories pre, post, and during a run? Or in other words, is it better to eat a pizza after a run or drink a protein shake? And like are mid-run Uncrustables better than Martin? I know how you feel about Martin, so
Oh, no, I just don't like the texture of Martin. Martin's
yeah.
great for some people, you know.
It's the texture though that gets me.
Yeah, for me, I'm just like, oh, I hate that. It's like Jello or something. Um, I wouldn't say like I wouldn't say that it's better. I think situationally it would depend on the athlete. Like it could be very helpful to have liquid nutrition before a run because you don't have to get up. I mean, it's absorbed. There's not a huge digestion process that needs to occur. So
Mhm.
it's absorbed quickly. So if you're somebody that gets up early in the morning and you're like, I don't want to eat before I go run, then you can do liquid options, you know? And then you're still getting your carbs and calories in pre-exercise without doing fasted training. And then post-exercise, if you look at again like that breakdown absorption rate and if you're trying to fully optimize post-exercise like glycogen resynthesis rates, the argument could potentially be made that a liquid solution is going to get in and start doing the job quicker than like a piece of pizza. That doesn't mean that a piece of pizza is bad. Any kind of fuel is great. But yeah, I think looking at it situationally and then post exercise too, if it's like particularly hot out and you lose your appetite after a big run, maybe a liquid option is going to be best. Um, and then with the uncrustable thing, like during exercise, we have to look at intensity that you're going and what your goals are. So if you are going faster, you're going at a higher percentage of your VO2 max, then technically Martin would probably be better than an uncrustable because you're not gonna you are at higher intensities, more blood is diverted away from your gut. So we need to have like the least stress on the gut possible, or we want to have least stress on the gut possible. And Martin's already kind of more simple and broken down, whereas in Uncrustable, you got to break that down. Now, if you're in a long ultra and you're not going at a higher percentage of your VO2 max. And that might actually be a good thing to include in the middle of an ultra because it helps kind of break up some of the sugar in the gels and hydration mix. Then that might be the better option at the time. So I think like both are great, but just used in different situations.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting too, because at like higher intensities, I think it's harder to take down like real food, because like
Mhm.
running and breathing and moving at the same
Yeah.
time is really difficult. So
Yeah,
having
I can't imagine doing an uncrustable in the middle of a marathon, like a road marathon or something.
impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess, is there an upper limit to how many carbs per hour your gut can absorb, like during higher intensity or longer, slower efforts?
Oh gosh. This is getting into the whole high carb movement, I
It
feel
is.
like.
We've had a lot of conversations about high carb. Like,
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think like the reality is right now, I don't know if the science has caught up to what we're seeing with certain like professional athletes that are promoting high carb fueling, like 150 to 200 grams per hour. But I will say that you do have to consider like what level of athlete are you? I'm not saying that like you can't treat yourself like the professional athlete that you are, even if you're not a professional athlete. But we have to consider like who are we in comparison to the people that are doing super high carb and like what does our physiology look like?
yeah,
And then we also need to consider body frame size, um, uh, like male versus female. Like we might have differences in fat oxidation rates. And so, like anecdotally, for a lot of the female athletes that I work with, we are seeing not as high of carb intake, and maybe not pushing over 90 grams of carbs per hour and performing really well, like I think it's important to remember that like you can experiment with this and just take no, but be aware of how you're feeling at your current level of carb intake, and then when you're starting to like push it up, see how you feel for that, because I've had athletes where they were at 190 to 100 grams per hour and then they push up to 120 grams per hour and they're like, actually I feel like borderline nauseous. And
mhm,
it's like we do that a couple of runs just to kind of see. So if you're wanting to test pushing higher carb per hour, I suggest like pushing up by like 10 grams per hour on a couple of runs and seeing how that feels. And then if that feels good, then you can push up another 10 grams. So not jumping from like 90 to 130 grams per hour, but see like pushing your way up slowly and then actually getting to a point where you're like, does this actually feel better or am I like really borderline nauseous? And if you're going to be at higher altitude, doing a lot of climbing, a lot of vertical, or you're going at higher intensity, like more is not necessarily better for people. Everyone's going to kind of have their limit. And so the traditional science shows that like 90 grams per hour is kind of the upper limit of carb intake, a mixed carb intake with glucose and fructose. And then it's just now, like recently in the last year or two, we're seeing people push the barrier, which is kind of cool. But also, it's like I've seen too many athletes end up with like it backfiring on them and they have all this GI distress. And we're like, oh, well, that was probably too much then.
yeah, absolutely. I think another question that kind of came up was like, how do you increase that? But I think you already answered it with like the 10 grams per run
Yeah.
and just see how that goes. But yeah, I think overdoing it is definitely something I've seen a lot happen. Um,
Uh-huh.
and it's like it's just as bad as underdoing it in a
Yeah,
lot.
exactly. Yeah, and then with again, I want to emphasize with my female athletes, haven't worked with many people, and even like my pro female runners that I work with, like that are going much over 90 grams per hour. Male athletes, I've had a lot that are going be able to push themselves to like 120. But with the female athletes, I'm just cautioning people like we do have different physiology, and even though the research is not, um, we don't have robust research on female athletes, we do know that we have higher fat oxidation rates compared to male counterparts. And so that does affect our ability to absorb and utilize carbohydrate. during exercise. And so just using caution when you're like thinking about how to approach it, I guess.
Yeah. What amount of carbs do you see most female athletes having success at?
Typically 60 to 70 grams per hour.
Oh wow. That's way
Yeah,
lower than I would
I
than
know.
think.
Yeah.
Jeez. Um,
Yeah.
there's another question in the chat from Taylor. It says, would you say that when you're upping your carbs per hour, how fast are you going to realize it's negatively affecting you? Or is it like more of a compounding issue hour after hour that you'll start feeling the GI distress?
I would say most often it's like after a couple hours of like after like 2 hours of running or something, because you got to like get it in your system and then see, how do things respond like as I'm continuing my training session or whatever. The other thing I will say, and I should mention this, is that it gets a little complicated too, because if you don't have your fluid consumption rate dialed, that can again impact your carb utilization rate. So you got to make sure that those things are dialed too, so that you're not falsely assuming that it's the carbs causing the issue when it could be the fluid electrolytes causing the issue. So it's like it is a little bit of a scientific equation slash experiment for people. And
Mhm.
so that's why, I mean, this is a good question, because that's why I don't recommend trying to do this 2 weeks before a race. You
Yep.
need to make sure that you know, do it 3 months, 6 months before a target event if you're wanting to experiment with it. Um, so if you hear about high carb fueling or whatever, and you're like, oh, I want to do that, don't change your fueling plan like 2 to 4 weeks before your race, please.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Black Canyon athletes, Boston athletes, let's start practicing now.
Yeah, exactly. Javelina athletes, if you haven't been changing things, you're borderline, maybe not, we might not want to do that too much and before race day.
Yeah. That kind of ties back to another question that came up was, is there a certain fluid to carb ratio that we should be aiming to maximize absorption?
Um, I wouldn't say there's like a ratio. I think you have to consider each component separately.
Okay.
you know, because the fluid intake is based on your fluid loss rates per
Mhm.
hour, and then your carb intake is based on a different thing, physiology, body frame size, intensity, all that kind of stuff. Um, and not that the fluid rate won't be impacted by some of those things. Like it will, like fluid loss rate is impacted by altitude. But I think they are separate things that you have to consider individually, and then they come together as your plan.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the last question I'll ask, I think we basically got through all of the questions sent in. Uh,
Yay!
yeah, we breezed through that really
That
fast.
was awesome.
Overlap, so it worked out really well. um, if someone is wanting to start practicing their fueling plan now,
Mhm.
what signs should they be looking for that that their current plan isn't working and needs adjusting?
Um, well, I would say like when we look at different systems in the body, right? Like, okay, GI stuff, nausea, vomiting, um, diarrhea, cramping would be things that I'd be like, okay, that's not good. However, I will say like one instance of those things doesn't mean your fueling plan is completely wrong. You got to remember that going into a training session also impacts things. Because I did have this happen to an athlete like that I was working with a couple weeks ago. She had some stomach issues and she was like, "Oh my gosh, like is my fueling plan bad?" And I was like, "Well, let's just make sure, like, let's fuel really well this week, do it again, and see how you feel." And she was fine. So I think she went into it underfueled, underhydrated, or something.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's the GI stuff, and then there's the like bonking issues, if you're feeling lightheaded or dizzy or low energy, that could be something that indicator that things are off. Or now this is complex, so I just, I don't want people to assume that it's the fueling plan. Muscle cramping can be complex, and it could be the fueling plan. It could not be the fueling plan, you know. With muscle cramping, again, you got to look outside of that exercise window. Am I going into the session? Like it has been shown that low carb intake before training sessions can cause muscle cramping too. Or if you like are going too hard in the training session compared to what you should be going, that can cause muscle cramping, dehydration, going into it, muscle cramping. So with all these things, as you're seeing, it's like that detective work and not assuming like, oh my gosh, it's this one thing, so I have to change it. And like, that's the only thing I'm considering.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are really good, like key call outs too, to make sure that like we're running easy runs easy and we're not getting through the week under fueled. And so
Yeah.
I think that brings up another question is like, one thing that I often do in my own training and tell athletes a lot of times is like, and I would be interested to see, like, hear your take on this too, is I've heard that like fueling for runs over 60 minutes is like a good rule of thumb, or do you bring a gel with you if you're only going over 90 minutes?
I think, oh, I think it's I think it's nuanced because it depends on if you're how fueled you're going into the session, right? So like some of my athletes, all they're taking in is like 40 grams of carbs or something pre-exercise, and maybe they're doing a 75-minute run, and then they're like that's like underdoing it for them, and they feel kind of like low energy or something. But if you were really trying to get fueled up beforehand, like some of my mountain bikers that like can't they have a hard time fueling during a session less than 90 minutes. They don't want to take their hands off the handlebars, whatever. Like we'll fuel a lot more beforehand, and then that'll get them through the training session, you know? So technically you could like get through a 60-minute train run or something if you fueled more beforehand and like got through it. And then there's also the this idea of like how do you feel, right? Like I think too often we just let numbers or like guidelines that we're talking about dictate how we're fueling ourselves, right? And like some of my athletes are like, I just feel so much better if I take a gel in the middle of my, training session or whatever. And I'm like, great, then you should do that. So it's not that you like, it's like this hard line of like, you shouldn't do this versus you should do this. I think it depends on like what your situation is, what your goals are, how you feel, learning to tune into your body. Now I will say like when you get to the 90 minutes and above area, that's where we are putting our bodies like under a risk of like even higher instances of stress. And so if you have nothing 90 minutes and above during your training session, that can start impacting performance and cause stress factors that could be detrimental and increase your injury risk to go up. So
Got
that's why, like, as you go longer and even higher intensity, I will say, like, 75 minutes at intensity, like, you might really want to be taking fuel during because intensity, you're going to empty glycogen stores quicker, be burning higher amounts of energy during that session. So, like, really considering intensity, duration, all these things going into it. That's not a
Yeah.
straightforward answer, but that's the point is like it's great to have frameworks and things, but you also need to consider like your individual situation when you're thinking about the fueling.
Yeah, that kind of last week on the community call, we had a pretty significant discussion around intensity duration. And like if you're training for a road marathon, like make sure that you're taking in the gels during the intense workout,
Yeah.
the intense parts of your long run, just to make
Mhm.
sure that you can like
Yeah.
get it down and keep going.
Yeah, or like in ultra or something, make sure if you have vertical in your race, make sure you're training on vertical with certain nutrition things, like you might not do well with solids on climbs. And so like you need to consider how am I structuring my solid intake versus gels and hydration mix within the context of the specific race too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. One more question in the chat is, do you have any recommendations on real or solid food that can supplement gels later in a race when palate fatigue kicks in?
Yeah, I think having like savory options are good. You know, things like mashed potatoes work really well, or it's funny, I used to recommend boiled potatoes with salt, but then one of my athletes was like, I took potato wedges and cooked and like sauteed them, and they were so much better because they don't get slimy.
Ooh, that's a good,
So,
yeah, that's a cheat
yeah.
code.
So just cutting up potatoes, sauteing them, put salt or seasoning on them or whatever, that could be an option for you. Soft pretzel bites are really kind of fun. And the regular pretzels are typically kind of dry, so just being cautious with that. Tortillas with things in them, like things meaning like your preference kind of thing. So some people like a little bit of nut butter. Some people like a little bit of avocado or something. So yes, you can have a little bit of fat and protein in an ultra. You have to be careful with how much you're doing. But usually like a max of 10 to 15 grams an hour for protein and fat is what I recommend. So if you want to do a savory option, like, yeah, you could put a little avocado or a little nut butter as long as it's not over like a whole avocado or something.
Mhm.
Um, and then potato chips are always good to kind of cleanse the palate fatigue. Like I'll have like some of my pro athletes that I work with will use potato chips at aid stations just as that palate break. You know, it really helps. But it's something that's at aid stations and they can like train with really easily too.
Yeah, totally. Okay, last question, I promise.
Yeah, yeah, you're fine.
Is you mentioned protein, and one question that's come up a couple different times throughout the years is like, how much protein should we be taking in during an ultra, and is there a timing? Like, I think we've talked about this before, where it's like maybe every 3 hours you'd get like a little
Yeah.
bit of protein in. How much
Yeah.
protein and when?
I think looking at the course, this is something that I do with my athletes is like look at the course map and like your crew stops, the elevation, all that kind of stuff, consideration of heat, all that. Um, as to figuring out, I don't know if I would say like every 3 hours might be a good rule of thumb, but and I would agree with that, but at the same time, it might make more sense to do like 4 hours or 5 hours if there's like you're gonna get a recovery mix at a like cruise stop or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I would say for the first like, I don't know, 4 to 6 hours, I'd probably use more like gels, hydration mix, things like that. I'm not saying you can't use solid food, but starting out, like you might be going a little bit at a little higher percentage of your VO2 max, and then you kind of settle in, and that's where you can kind of start bringing solids in, and then with the protein piece, again, consideration, like if you're taking in a bunch of protein, even 15 grams before you do a big climb, that might be not good. Like that might not be good on your stomach. So again, like I think if you consider the course profile and then the stops and then like put out your protein into the plan, then I think that's the way I'd probably approach it.
cool. Yeah, yeah, love that.
Lots to think about, you know, and it's like that's why we talk about this stuff like doing it far ahead of time, and then that's why like your coach can take a look at your plan and just like help pick out some of these little things that we might forget about when we're putting things together, you know?
Totally. And I think that's also, it's so important to have like a backup plan for the
Oh
plan.
yeah.
Um, just in
Yeah,
case.
yeah. I always say like have your A plan and then you got a B and C plan
Yes, yes.
and your aid station plan. So like
Station plan. Yes,
yeah.
that's such a good call out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Kylee, oh my gosh, you're just such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing everything you know.
Yeah.
Guys, Kylie's amazing. If you want to work with her one-on-one, you should. And if
And I do discounted rates for the group. So if anyone is worried about financial stuff, I can work with that and all that. So don't
Yeah.
worry about that component.
Do you also have the Flight Collective, which is incredible, and like that's a
Yeah.
really good option as well.
Hmm. So
Uh,
if you there are lower ticket investment pieces that if you just need a little help, like you can get somewhere with those, or the book is like a really good option to get all of the stuff that you need.
yeah,
So
I was gonna say, if you guys haven't picked up this book yet, you can order it on Amazon. You can get it at Human Kinetics. You can find it anywhere. I saw it at Barnes and Noble this week and was
you
like,
did?
oh yeah, in Tucson, Barnes
Oh
and Noble.
my gosh,
Yeah,
that's
so I was like,
cool.
I was gonna take a picture and send it to you. I should,
Oh, yeah,
but
I've never seen it in the wild, like in an actual bookstore. So
oh, maybe I'll go back today and snap a picture for you.
so don't feel pressure, but that's cool.
Yeah, I've got it like bookmarked and tabbed. It's an
Cool.
incredible book and it's just such a good resource to have. But Kylee is also an incredible resource to have. So I'll put your email and all your contact info into our newsletter this week. And so if athletes want
Nice.
to reach out, we can
Great.
definitely coordinate that. So thank you so much, Kylee.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
have
It was
a
great to
great
see
weekend, everyone. Great holiday weekend.
you. Yeah. All right, guys, have a
Bye.
good weekend.
Thank you.